Concerning human acts, I have heeded the word of your lips, and have kept myself from walking in the paths of the violent. Here, the acts of human acts are expressed in contrast to the acts of the Messiah Jesus himself, the Son of God. In other words, the Messiah Jesus, like us humans, like the people of God, will follow God's word and not walk in the paths of the violent. In other words, he will not commit any sin apart from God's word. Isn't that right? Sin refers to acting outside of God's word. In other words, failing to love my neighbor as myself is sin, and failing to love God as myself is sin. No, anything that fails to act as this Bible says is sin. However, the Messiah Jesus himself, even in light of this Bible verse, is to act perfectly, complete, and perfect. In other words, he will never sin. My steps have held fast to your paths, my feet have not stumbled. Here, my steps symbolize the thoughts, words, and actions of the Messiah Jesus. Furthermore, your paths here refer to God's words, will, and plans. In other words, this verse means that the Messiah Jesus will not deviate even slightly from God's words, will, and plans in his thoughts, words, and actions, but will firmly uphold, follow, and obey them. In other words, he will keep and practice all of this law, God's words. No, the Messiah, Jesus himself, will be without any sin or blemish. Furthermore, through this, God will fulfill and accomplish all the will, purpose, and plans he had for sending the Messiah, Jesus, to this earth.
If you want to know more, please subscribe.